All right, let's recap how the Buffalo Bills handled things this offseason. Worth mentioning that the offseason is still ongoing, and in fact, it's possible that as of the time of recording this video, something could have changed by the time I publish this video. But nonetheless, the big stuff has probably been done by Buffalo. So let's talk about where they're at, where they were at, who they lost, who they gained, and what could happen in the future. So yeah, let's just get into all of it. First, let's see where PFF graded them for each positional category, and it's worth mentioning, I think Bills fans will disagree with how PFF viewed many of their positional categories, one of them being passing, which they said was only 6th best. Now, that's not including Josh Allen's rushing ability, but still, I mean, listen, Josh Allen won MVP last year. He was very good. He's a big part of why this team was great. There was something where, when it came to Josh Allen versus Lamar Jackson in the MVP race, I think in that narrative, one thing that happened was I think the Bills supporting cast got a bit underrated. There were still very good pieces last year for Buffalo. The receiving core was fine. The offensive line pass blocked very well. James Cook was a great rusher. They finished 3rd in running. Again, part of that is Josh Allen, but still. The defense, PFF was not as crazy about. 26th highest graded run defense, 9th best pass rush, but 31st coverage. They did have some pieces that were very good, but not complete, at least according to PFF, and I would say that matched some of the games that I watched as well. So, okay, now let's look at the pieces that they have lost, and it's worth mentioning everyone on this list, except for the bottom 2 players, still could end up re-signing with Buffalo. These are current free agents, although you have to wonder if they are going to re-sign. Why haven't they re-signed already? And while I wouldn't say anyone on this list is a star player that the Bills can't be successful without, I also would say that these are still some pieces that are important. So first, Amari Cooper, who again, at times we thought, could he kind of complete this roster? Could he be a number 1 receiver? Didn't fully work out there. I do wonder, do they consider bringing him back just to try and see if maybe with another year in that system could things get better, or do they just feel he's over the hill? Also, Von Miller, who kind of had his best year last year. This is finally when they can get out of the contract, but I thought for Buffalo had obviously not his best year overall, but his best year for Buffalo this most recent year when they kind of just let him be a rotational piece. They didn't try to make him an every down player, let him just come in obvious pass rushing situations, and was able to at least be an effective player last year. Rasul Douglas is next on the list. He's someone who has had many good years with many different teams. He started his career in Philadelphia, went to Carolina, then went to Green Bay, and really that's when he kind of became the Rasul Douglas we know, was able to be effective. Came over in a trade in 2023. Ultimately, last year, though, just wasn't that great, so that's part of why the coverage grade was so low. And you have a bunch of interior defensive linemen who are still on the market. Austin Johnson, Dwayne Smoot, Quentin Jefferson, Jordan Phillips. Those are all interior defensive linemen. And listen, you can sit here and say, well, the defensive line didn't grade particularly well last year. Ultimately, these are still players that if you're letting them walk, you have to replace them with somebody. So there's still some pieces here that you might have to replace. Kair Elam and Sam Martin. Sam Martin, a punter, I think they'll be okay there. But Kair Elam, a guy who they drafted, sort of famously, they chose him over Trent McDuffie. That didn't fully work out, as McDuffie's been an All-Pro, and Kair Elam has, not been great. They ultimately traded him for peanuts to the Dallas Cowboys. Also, just to clarify, they did select Kair Elam after McDuffie, but they traded with the Bills, or traded with the Chiefs, let the Chiefs get McDuffie over Elam. So that's why I say it that way. As for their additions, they did add Josh Palmer, who I've always liked as a piece. Again, he's not going to be your number 1 option, and he's not someone that you're going to look at and say, oh, he'll be a superstar. But for the Bills, seems kind of like the way they want to build this receiving core isn't to have maybe 1 star, but to have a bunch of guys who they can just trust can run their routes effectively. Palmer should be able to do that for them. Joey Bosa is another big question mark, as he's, usually amazing when he's on the field. Ultimately, he is coming off of his kind of worst year, although he was still pretty good when on the field, but a real lack of playing time. He's had about 1,000 snaps combined in the past 3 years. Of course, that's not to say he can't be an effective player for them, just there is the risk of injuries, which has kind of plagued his whole career, really. But if he can stay healthy, they could end up with a borderline elite level edge rusher for cheap, which would be a huge win for them. So we'll just see how well that works. Then you have some, I think, smaller moves, but still worth talking about. So Kendrick Green, he's more of a depth offensive lineman, who did get some playing time with Houston, but is really just, a fine depth piece. Also had some playing time with Pittsburgh. Then you have Michael Hoyt, who is a defensive lineman. So they did add some defensive linemen after losing some. Hoyt's more of an edge rusher, but you added him. You added Larry Ogunjobi, who Ogunjobi's the kind of guy who always seems to get like a decent amount of money, even though I don't know if I fully see it, but he's a fine player and he'll certainly help the Buffalo Bills and might be an upgrade over some of the guys I talked about who they lost. So you did add some pieces here. Then you have Dane Jackson, who kind of, is a player who played for the Bills for quite some time, went to Carolina, and in a limited playing time did not play particularly well. So maybe best for both of those guys to just, both of those parties to link back up. You didn't have Derek Forrest, a safety who has not had a ton of playing time when he was with Washington, only had 74 snaps last year, did have a couple years where he looked okay in a little bit of playing time, but really these are mostly depth pieces with the exception of Palmer and Bosa, who I would expect to be, if not starters, guys who are on the field a decent amount. And finally, we got to talk about the guys that they extended. Josh Allen, he wasn't up for a new deal. Some of these guys weren't up for new deals, but he was someone that they wanted to extend anyway because, hey, let's get out in front of it because he's going to get top market value, period. Let's just give him the top market value in 2025 instead of in 2027. Ultimately, obviously, he is the piece of this team. He is where they're trying to go. Ty Johnson, they re-signed as well. You have Khalil Shakir, who some people said, is that a bit much for Khalil Shakir? I don't know. I think Khalil Shakir is really good. I think that's an underpay, if anything. Greg Rousseau, a similar thing. Not a huge name, but a really good player and definitely worth a big deal, in my opinion. You didn't have linebacker Terrell Bernard, who they gave an extension to, who, again, I don't think it's coming off of his best year, but ultimately they decide he has had good, he had a good 2023 year. They're kind of banking on that. Still a, very young player. Guy's 25 years old right now. Christian Benford, who I thought was probably their best secondary player last year, certainly the best corner last year. He was really good. So you could argue they're buying high, but they're extending him. And DeMar Hamlin feels like he's going to be a career Bill at this point. So ultimately, they've extended some pieces. I do think they've hurt their interior a little bit, but some of these guys you could argue are addition by subtraction. They did add a couple pieces that should help them on the interior and also on the edge with guys like, Joey Bosa, right? So trying to improve that a little bit. I still would like a little bit more help in the secondary, and we do have a whole draft to, potentially do that. But ultimately, the Bills had to make kind of smaller moves on the edge, and this is what they decided to do with it. So, yeah, I find it interesting, but those are kind of my thoughts on their offseason. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think? Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.